This is the Chicks of FinTwit, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook. Join me as I highlight female trailblazers and their male allies across the industry as each shares their expertise on a variety of finance topics. Nothing is off limits. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode.
All opinions expressed by Caitlin Cook and the Chicks of FinTwit podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of the host or any of their affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only, is not investment advice, and should not be relied upon for any investment decisions. We are not recommending any securities, nor is this an offer or sale of a security.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chicks of FinTwit podcast, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook, also known as Dead Kate Bounce on Twitter. And today we have a celebrity on the pod, a fellow upstate New Yorker, Katy Perry, not to be confused with the less significant Katy Perry. This is VP of Marketing at Public. And again, fellow New Yorker, so especially happy to have her on the pod. Katy, welcome.
Thank you. Love the upstate Western New York connection we have. And I'm such a big fan of this pod. I was like super fan. And so I'm just happy to be here as usual in my life. So thanks so much.
Twitter's a weird place. I fangirl you, you fangirl my pod. We have you on my pod. It all happens. But I guess for those who are still confused somehow between you and the musician, you don't need to sing fireworks today, but maybe if you could just give a little introduction on yourself and your background.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not married to Orlando Bloom, so just get that out of the way. My name is Katy. I grew up in Syracuse, New York. I went to college in the Midwest. I studied journalism, always loved journalism, thought that's what I wanted to do. Ended up in the marketing world, specifically in tech and startups. And for the last almost 2 years, I've been at public.com, which is an investing app on the mission to make the public markets work for all people. So we essentially combine a mobile investing platform with community and social features designed to help people learn about the stock market together.
And I love following the whole Public's journey on Twitter and whatnot, seeing all of your ads you're putting out. And I do like the whole, making it social. So maybe we'll start there. This whole celeb crossover thing we've got going on with the Katy Perry vibes. I do think the one thing that's interesting with Publix and just kind of making the stock market social and that whole trend that I think we're seeing in a lot of businesses is, looping in celebrities and creators into businesses. And I guess, could you maybe talk a little bit about what you guys are doing at Publix and what you've seen on that front, if there are any trends or important things to note there?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that I think you've seen over the past, several years, but people who are in mainstream culture are also branding themselves as entrepreneurs and investors. And then the other way too, like entrepreneurs and business people are sort of celebrities. So the Elon Musks of the world, I can't remember, I wouldn't be able to name a CEO when I was growing up, I don't think. And now you're seeing some of these CEOs kind of emerge in mainstream culture as celebrities. You see celebrities like Rihanna, who became a billionaire or was worth $1 billion as of last week. That's someone growing up with. I just saw her as an artist. And so I think it's a cool trend to see. And especially for young people to see the people they're following either on YouTube or in pop culture are also sort of positioned as savvy business people is a great way for people to learn about some of these concepts. And so that's exactly kind of what we're trying to do, is find those links between things that are accessible to people to help educate around some of these concepts that in the past were sort of framed in a way that was not accessible to the average person.
And I think the last part of what you just said is so important, just around gatekeeping that we've seen traditionally in the industry. And the one thing that I've loved so much, and I'm sure you agree, we've talked about this a bit offline, and like the socializing, the whole investment process and learning about finance generally, it just makes it all, I just think it's all kind of for the better. And, you're very much into financial literacy, as am I, and we can talk about that too. But do you think that this whole socialization and, getting celebrities from different backgrounds who have different audiences has done a lot to promote the investing community and financial literacy in general?
Yeah, the role community and the social features really play in public is sort of constructed from the start around how can conversations that are brought into the open among friends or just peer investors unlock new ways of thinking or just learning opportunities. So the way we sort of approach social and community from the beginning, even when we were much smaller, was about sharing ideas and collaborating. And it was never positioned as following based on performance or copying moves or, here's a group of experts and here's everyone else. It's really like the power is in the diversity of thought. So one example, a few months ago, there was a large tech company and there was a lot of conversations going on about unionizing some of their workers. And you had a lot of people who knew a lot about tech in this company talking about that. But then you also had workers, actual blue collar workers who worked at this company on public who were talking about their personal experience. So it's really, I think the power of community is in the blending of ideas. You might be talking to someone who's a marketing expert and knows about a certain platform's ad units. Like that person has such deep knowledge there. And if they could share insights with somebody who's in the medical field, it's a really interesting way to just discover new opportunities for investing and unpack some of these concepts. So that's really what we think of. We see social as the educational layer. And we actually ran a study last year and found that a lot of people, they're going to their friends and their networks for sharing ideas on these topics and navigating it together. So we just wanted to build a place where you didn't have to be alone with your charts and numbers, and you could sort of navigate the things going on either in your portfolio or in the market overall with other people and figure it out together, because that's how we as humans really learn about a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And when you think about investing generally, the one thing that I love about it is that, like you said, diversity of thought is so important. Just coming from a finance background doesn't necessarily qualify you to know any more about a certain company, right? We could have blue collar workers, we could have tech workers, people in the medical field that know significantly more. And I love that you guys are kind of not an ad or anything by any means, but putting that conversation out there and giving a space for people to kind of congregate and talk about those things in a casual setting. So I definitely support, the whole social aspect of it. I guess in your experience on the other side, though, what do you think are the biggest negative externalities that have come out of this trend?
Of just talking about the investment trends overall, social. Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of criticism around sort of the meme stock movement kind of stems from the fact that the assumption that people are seeing and hearing things and they're just going and copying it, not knowing what they're doing, sort of like the blind leading the blind. We kind of take, and I personally take a more like realistic but optimistic view. Realistic in the fact that yes, a lot of people who are entering investing for the first time right now are new, and there's a lot of room for education and understanding of how the systems at play work. It's never as simple as just follow one thing. It's never, if it looks too and it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So the realistic viewpoint is yes, these are new investors a lot of the times. I think the optimistic view though is that to completely sort of dismiss this new wave of investors is to assume that just because they came in through a meme stock and that was their entry into the market means that they could never possibly evolve. And I think what's changing is that the entry point for people into investing in the stock market is different than it used to be. And there's more entry points. So maybe they do hear about it on SNL because SNL has a Pete Davidson character that has something to do with stocks. That's great, I think, because that's more entry points for people. My entry point was my 401k, which I didn't even know it was in it for 7 years, and I was figuring it out on my own. So I think there is some fair sort of skepticism around the meme stock movement. I think overall it's been a net positive, because anytime someone's looking at an event and saying, I want to know how our financial system works, or I want to know how the stock market works, if that's what makes them curious, that's fine. And we believe that you can really evolve from that point as an investor.
Yeah, we all start somewhere, and it's a means to an end, right? Like you said, 401k, that's one of the first places I started as well. And it really doesn't matter. It's personal finance for a reason. And I say that all the time, but we all start at different points with different knowledge bases, and we just progress from there. It's not something that we all have to start at the same place. So as easy as it is to sort of judge the meme stock folks, and maybe some of them got burnt, but you hear a lot of older investors that I've talked to, like not in relation to the meme stock movement, but oh yeah, eventually at some point you're going to put a position and you're going to get burned. That's just how it is. Everyone has that experience at some point if they're, kind of making a lot of moves. I'm not a huge like trader by any means, but if you're trading that often, you're going to have some positions that don't pan out. And that's just the way that it goes. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's an AMC or a more well-established stock, or it was a little bit more surprising, I guess, so to say, but it's very dependent on kind of where you're coming from. And I think a lot of people don't remember that when you see on social, but it is interesting kind of on that same line. It seems like a lot of people with the, socialization of investing and everything, people seem a lot more open about talking about their portfolios, which I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on a bit, because it used to be such a taboo topic to even talk about money. And now people, I don't know if I'm just biased from seeing it on Twitter, from being on there too often, but it seems like people are very much open about, the trades that they're making and what they're invested in and why.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, people are just more transparent about these topics. I think about when I first started my career was the first point at which employees at different companies would start sharing their salary information with each other to kind of gain an edge in the gauge. And that to me, I was like, whoa, what? I just think people are more open about some of these things. And the other piece too is, for example, on public, it's not showing the dollar amounts. And so it's not really about flexing your wealth or your gains so much. It's about speaking to topics that you're passionate about and finding other people who want to also talk about those things. And so it does make it accessible, especially in a community like ours that's 90% long-term investors. The conversations are about bigger topics that more people can touch. It's not about the technical analysis of a stock, which most people don't feel comfortable or they're intimidated by it. I even see some conversations in FitTwit that intimidate me. And like, I'm in the industry, but I know I'm a little bit even an outsider, versus a trend about esports where a lot of people can speak to that. A company like Roblox, I don't invest in that company and this isn't advice, but we had a lot of parents in public talking about how much their kids were into Roblox and their experience as a consumer. And so when it's long-term, the conversations are just more interesting, in my opinion. It's about stuff that we can all relate to and not just one small sliver of a technical analysis of something.
It is so interesting too. And I've learned so much from the conversations that I've seen. Like you said, I'm in the industry, or I started in the industry, and there's so much that I have learned from social media just because I've seen people picking up on conversations, people chiming in, and it's a net positive for everyone. Like, we don't need to hog this information that we have. You might as well. I'm a big proponent of, financial education generally, but just if you have, an affinity for something, you should be using those gifts and kind of sharing them and helping other people to learn more too, instead of trying to hog them, I guess, which you don't see that often, but it does happen. And I think that having these conversations be more open, and we all can learn so much about a ton of different things, like Roblox. Like you said, I had no idea what they were until I went on Twitter one day and had people talking about them with their kids and bribing their kids with them to do schoolwork.
Really
so it's a lot.
Yeah. Another example is, and I don't invest in this one either, but Snapchat. There were people, and I was like, oh, Snapchat. Like, as a consumer, I deleted that off my phone a few years ago. And then hearing people say, oh, I have teenage kids, this is all they use for messaging. Like, even anecdotal, it's interesting to hear kind of people's perspectives. But I think to your earlier point, like your past guest, Kyla Scanlon, is a great example of it can be fun and accessible, but still really smart. And like, I think, sometimes the creators in this space kind of get lumped with the ones that might be shilling something or less informed, but there's some really smart people that are distilling these things down into really digestible ways. And to me, that's like the hardest thing you can do, and requires the most intelligence of like, how do you take something complex and make it accessible and fun? And there's a lot of really great creators doing that right now and helping a lot of people understand the nuances of the market.
Agreed. And I think it's so easily underestimated how hard it is to make things easy. And you see it like, I don't remember what the exact quote is, but if you make something easy enough, people will think that it's like almost dumb information, right? Like they don't even have to think about how hard it was originally to simplify it that much because you did it so well. And like, I mean, shout out to Kyla for doing that. So I'm a huge fan of her and she knows that, but especially in finance, it's so nuanced and it's such a sensitive topic for so many people. And there's so much to it that it takes a lot to distill that down. So props to her and any of the other creators in the space, because it is really making it more welcoming to people. Because I know, I just anecdotally too, like when I started going to school for finance, I had a lot of people that I was friends with from home kind of like, oh, that's so boring. So it doesn't have to be boring. I think it's actually, I'm biased, but it's such an exciting space. And it's just all about framing in the way that the stories are being told to make that seem a little bit more interesting to people that aren't on the inside.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I guess on sort of last on the investing side of things, because I do want to get into, financial literacy and financial education in schools and whatnot, because we both feel the same way on this. But what are some of the biggest trends that you've seen from, keeping an eye out on the investment community, seeing it become more socialized? What are the biggest trends that you've seen recently from an investment standpoint?
Yeah, I think a couple of things interesting in our community in general. A lot of people are thinking about investing in the context of like a holistic sort of personal finance journey. So they're talking about this stuff in the context of student loan policy or in the context of budgeting. And it's not this like hobby that sits alone. And again, we skew more long-term, so that makes sense. But I think it's really healthy and interesting to see that perspective. And we also see like the people rallying with each other. And it's similar to having, our CEO talks all the time about like a gym buddy. You want someone who's sometimes on your level to go to the gym with and hold each other accountable. And you see that forming in pockets in our community with people forming little clusters and groups, checking in, sharing insights. And that really, you see it really helps people to not be alone in the journey and to understand that just because you might be at a certain point of your life and not fully knowledgeable yet doesn't mean you can't learn. We ran a study last year and over half of the people we surveyed taught themselves how to invest. So most people teach themselves, and most people don't have kind of the privilege of a parent showing them or learning in school. And so for some people that initial block is just feeling like everyone's ahead of them. And I think we always do that. We always assume everyone's ahead of us, and when you realize and you're surrounded by people who are kind of there with you, I think it's it removes a big psychological barrier to entry, which I think is almost as important as kind of like the economic barrier to entry to investing, which things like fractional and zero commission models have like alleviated to some point. So those are two things I think are pretty cool that we see sort of every day over in our world.
Awesome. And you sort of alluded to what I wanted to talk about next, and it's kind of slashing down the gates in this whole investing realm and finance in general. It just seems a lot of people don't have access to education on investing or even just general finance, right? Like getting into more on like financial literacy. But my big pitch on this is that, and it shouldn't even have to be a pitch at this point, right? It's 2021, but here we are, and it still is not mandatory in schools. It's absurd because there is nothing on this earth that is like not impacted by money. It doesn't matter what career you're in, you need to have some sort of baseline understanding of that, and it's not mandatory. So I don't know where you want to start with this, but I know we wanted to talk about financial literacy, and I could go all day because it blows my mind. I'm not talking about figuring out how to buy stocks, but how to write a check, how to open a savings account, how to fund a 401k. What's the difference between a Roth and a regular IRA? Like none of this is covered. It was covered for me because I was a finance major. And even then it wasn't necessarily transferable to anyone's life. It was more industry specific. So where do we even start with that? Because apparently we haven't had that figured out yet.
I don't know. And I personally I want to do more research on just like the policy side of what goes into the curriculum building. And I know there's a whole thing, but to me, it seems like, yeah, pretty obvious. Like I learned how to operate a jigsaw in 7th grade. Shout out to Mr. McCaffrey. but like, what the heck? Like it's crazy. And yeah, I mean, even I went to, after I went to college, I remember logging into Sallie Mae for the first time. And like, literally that's when I got like debt. And like, I was like, wait a minute, my interest is how much? And like, then I was seeing the dark side of compounding. And I just, honestly, I didn't even compute, like, and like, that's crazy to me. And like, I don't even know where to start. I think, I was fortunate where when I was 18, I remember my dad on a Sunday was like, I'm going to show you how to invest, and like set me up with like a Vanguard account and like walk me through it. And he was like, you can do this. And taught me the basics, taught me about long-term versus trading. What are the differences of capital gains, across long and short term. And like, I would just love for everyone to have that opportunity. And it's most of the time not going to come from a parent in most families. So it's like, where can that come from? And how can people in our space and companies like ours help fill that gap in places for people? Because it's just a void, and you have people out there just trying to navigate it themselves. Another interesting thing in the survey we found was that most people, one of the biggest friction points once they're teaching themselves is not even knowing where to go, because there's just so many places and things, and it's like a media literacy, but for financial news is also a gap for people. So I'm with you. There's like so much to be done. I don't have the answers, but I think, companies like Public and other people in our space do have like an obligation as people trying to democratize the space to provide those pathways for education, because they're just not existing elsewhere for most people.
Yeah. And it's one of those interesting things too, right? I think that the conversations are opening up. So I know that we're going in the right direction, but I just think back to school, like you said, like using a jigsaw, learning calculus, like how many of these things, not that calculus isn't valuable, if my old calc teacher hears this, but it's just not as generally applicable to everything in anyone's life. Like anyone on any corner of the globe needs to learn about finance. They don't need to be an expert, but I have friends message me asking about questions about loans, and they're technically like grown adults. Not that I really feel like I'm an adult sometimes, but these are things that you need to know, and there's no getting around them. There's no saying, it's not like saying, oh yeah, well, I'm not going to use geometry in my job, because that's probably very well true. Not that kids always, realize these things at the time, but I would not say that about, oh, I never need to open a bank account, because you do. And like, that's the world that we live in. And there needs to be some baseline assistance that should be there. And the people in power should, definitely ensure that happens. Because I think betterment of society wise, the more that you educate people, the more you empower them, the more that they see what's possible and what they can do. And without that, like you said, it's so confusing. There's so much out there, and it's so overwhelming, and it's not even necessarily hand-holding, but I think people just need to be given a sense of direction at the least.
Yeah, but you brought up a good point too about studying like finance, and I took like an econ class in high school, but what I've realized is that like when you're growing up, it's like the economy is like this thing over here, and then there's you, and like there's not enough links between you and how the economy works, how money works. And it's just these separate things. You don't realize how your retirement, other pieces of your life are part of that. And it's at least that's how I was taught. It's like this thing over here. And I think most people learn by understanding kind of the direct connection to their lives. So I think that's a piece that we need to figure out, like how to make, I don't know. I would love to be in some of these policy conversations around education. We also did square dancing. I don't know if you did that in your corner of New York State.
We did.
I can bust out a Cotton Eye Joe at a wedding, so I got that going, but I would have rather had a budgeting class, I think, for sure.
Only the most essential transferable skills. I also learned how to play pickleball very well. And if you don't know what that is, you are missing out. That was my favorite part of gym class, but maybe not as important as filling out a check, because I did not learn how to do that in school. My mom had to teach me how to do that. So shout out to Anne. Thank you. I know you'll be listening to this. Thanks for that. But I guess kind of around the same topic here, we talked about money, sort of a taboo conversation, or taboo topic in the past, and it still sort of is in some circles, I think, but especially when it comes to, you know, this is the Chicks of FinTwit podcast. So, I mean, this is still very much a real thing, but it's very much a taboo topic around women. And I know we've seen it changing, but I guess I'd like to get your thoughts on how you've seen that changing and why it's so important to get those money conversations out in the open, but specifically for women. I mean, men as well, but also women.
Definitely a trend that's backed by a lot of studies. Our survey showed men, I think it was 58% of men talked about finance and investing with their friends, and I think a little under half for women. So women were a little bit behind. And I think the problem is that if you think about the educational opportunity that comes from having these conversations, when women aren't having those conversations, they're not sharing ideas, and they're at a disadvantage because that moment's not happening. I will say, like, and I don't know if it's because I started working in this space or I got older, but like over the last 2 years, like my brunch conversations with my girlfriends go into this stuff. And I don't know if it's because it's more mainstream or they know I work in this space, but that's the kind of stuff I want to see more of. Because honestly, like if you want a good brunch conversation, there's a lot of like drama in the market in any week. There's things happening, there's things to talk about. And so, yeah, I think, you know, it's just all this stuff is like a vestige of just like society over time. And like, you think a lot has changed, but you're still trying to catch up from norms that existed in the past that were, you know, inequitable or whatever. So I think to the extent that people realize that you can have money conversations without talking about dollar amounts or seeming like you're being, you know, you're bragging or making people uncomfortable, and you keep it at a certain level, I think that's the best way for a lot of people to learn, whether it's sharing resources, podcasts. I dropped this pod in our Slack channel last week. So like, we got to just get this stuff talked about more. And I think some of that is breaking the stereotype that it's boring, because it's just not.
I mean, what's more exciting? Some guy drama or drama in the markets from some short squeezes? I'd choose the latter, but maybe I'm just built different. But it's true though. Like I think back to kind of my different circles of friends, and I don't know, I don't know what the reasons for this could be. A lot of different things, but like my friends that I talk about investments with that are females, they're all from Twitter, which I think is hysterical. All of my finance friends are from Twitter, but outside of that, it's still sort of, for me at least, and I'm sure I'm probably not the only one for anyone listening on this, but it is an awkward conversation. I get really excited about something where it's like market related and it's just blank stare, which is super uncomfortable, but it's just hard to like, I continuously sort of drop breadcrumbs and try to push along those conversations in some way that could come off as potentially interesting. But I feel like we've got a lot of work to do on making it more flashy for people, or where they can at least, you know, if you can show people where the value is in it for them, because we're all very self-serving just as creatures. I think that could be helpful too, but it's difficult.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's like people don't like speaking about things unless they're confident. And so if you don't have confidence and you're maybe new to it, you might feel like you have that imposter syndrome to even have the conversation is one thing. And then there's also studies that show women are more likely to want to have expertise in something before speaking to it than men. I don't know if that's the exact soundbite, but that's the gist. And I don't think that's bad, but I think that's great. Wanting to know what you're talking about before talking, I think is a good thing. But what happens is you have that trepidation, entering a conversation where sometimes it might be better just to navigate it together, feel confident asking questions, and then kind of get there. But I think that's part of it too. So I think we're in the right direction for sure, but there's still work to be done.
Yeah. And that's the case with a lot of things. But I think that in this situation too, it's just bringing up those conversations more often. Maybe I'll bring it up next time I have bottomless mimosa brunch next weekend. So I will shout out to you when I do that. Let's talk about GameStop. But more importantly, your 401k. But other than that, I mean, I guess I have a lot of questions for you, honestly, because I feel like you've had a lot of different experiences on this. But what was your transition into the financial markets like, I guess, right? Because you said that wasn't your background. I think you said journalism.
Yeah.
What was your personal story, I guess, for that transition, and what were the most difficult parts? Because that's different for everyone, but I'm curious.
Public was my first job in this space. And I joined because I had worked with one of our CEOs in the past. So I used to do like consulting for early stage startups. And one of our CEO's life was one of my clients. So I worked with him. And a couple of years after we worked together, we were catching up, getting coffee, and he kind of slid his phone across the table and showed me this app. And then it kind of goes back to our previous conversation. I just immediately got what we were trying to do. I had a good friend who was like crushing it as a SaaS salesperson. And they were telling me that all their money was in a Chase account, just like a checking account. And I was just like, wait, what? Like, you are one of the smartest people I know. Like, and I got it. I was like, yeah, people aren't doing this and they're not understanding that, they don't know how to learn. So for me, it was like, I was an outsider, but I always saw that coming into public, being an outsider is an advantage, because we're trying to speak to an audience outside of kind of the echo chamber. So like, I love chilling in FinTwit, but like, you guys are on another level, right? Like, and it's almost my job.
Don't lump me in there.
But like, I love it. The culture is like hilarious. And there's so many nice people I've met through there, but it's almost my job more so to, yes, be like immersed in those circles, but like be outside of that, in the world outside of that circle, because that's who most of our customers are. People who aren't in that inner circle already, and they're trying to come in. So I always saw it as an advantage. If I had kind of cut my teeth at a major bank or something, I just wouldn't be looking at things the same way. Sometimes I look at copy and I'm like, I don't know what that means. And like, if I don't know what it means, then our customer definitely does it. And so you can sort of, if you're trying to go after a mass audience, being an outsider kind of helps. But it has been like an amazing journey so far, and like an amazing learning curve. But that's how I got into this space. And again, a lot of it was this like drive that I had to make an impact, to help promote more financial literacy. Not because I was like really deep in investing myself, or even fintech, frankly. I just love building amazing mission-led brands that have strong products and a really kind of empathetic approach to marketing. And I saw that opportunity at Public. But it's been really fun to be in this space. It's a different industry than I'm used to. And so far it's been great.
Yeah. And that diversity of thought that you mentioned way back earlier in the conversation, it always comes back. And it's so important, because even I feel like a lot of people get very set in the fact that they come from the industry. And I've worked for 2 years, and this happens to me sometimes. I'm not even going to lie about it. I'm like, oh yeah, well, I worked in finance, so I know X, which is a horrible way to think. And I'm working on that. But it's just interesting too, because you get people from different backgrounds and they have different, just your brains are all wired differently. And it's so interesting to see people that aren't cut from that exact same cloth that you see at, one of the major banks coming in as more of an advantage than a disadvantage, which is what you totally think be the opposite. But it's definitely.
Yeah, it's good to have that mix. Like obviously, like a lot of our product team, our brokerage team, they got the expertise in this space. So there's areas where you really need that. And then I think there's pockets of a company where you bring in the outsiders that can really help you innovate and think about things a little differently.
Especially with marketing, right? Because that's all end client, and you need to understand the back end of what your product is and how it's being built. But I think a lot of it, no, not a marketing expert, but I do feel like it's common sense, right? Like if you're building to a certain audience, you need to know how they think, and you need to bring in people that think that way so you can bridge the gap on what you're trying to sell them and what they want to be sold and how they want to be sold it. So it's just so multifaceted on that front. But I do think that investing specifically is so easily intimidating that any way to make that more simple and more friendly to them is a necessity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not to get specific on Public again, because this is # not an ad for Public, but love their work. Love your work. But have you guys tried bringing celebrities on the platform? I know I've seen some of your ads in New York City, which I love, bringing back the old school marketing on the sides of buildings, on taxi cabs. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the ad campaign running in New York features some of our community members, and they're from all sorts of different backgrounds. I think one works in startups, another's an entrepreneur, one is a DJ. So that's really, it's a simple execution, but it's designed to kind of spotlight investors, not in the ways that they've been portrayed historically, and using real people in our community. So there's really, I think the best ones are, there's a couple in Brooklyn where it's like a mural and you see them all together. And that's really what represents us as a brand, is this mix of people. So sometimes people ask me like, who would be your dream celebrity endorser? And like for a brand like ours, one person could never encapsulate what we're trying to be. So if like Jennifer Aniston's the smart water person, like that makes sense. It's very simple for them. For us, it's going to be a mix of people. So when we work with different celebrities or public figures, we look for a few things. A lot of times we do, they're outsiders. They're not positioning themselves as financial experts, but with that, they've made moves in their career that show they're either passionate about financial literacy or they're budding kind of entrepreneurs in addition to whatever their main job is. And they have that really authentic connection to what we're trying to do. And that's a really important piece. Otherwise, it'd just be kind of like random. So that's kind of what we look for, is the mission alignment, the brand alignment. Same thing goes with creators. We want to make sure we're working with people who reinforce the same values we do as a company. And that vetting piece is really important as the creator economy continues to grow. It's very different working with an individual person who's usually not an established business themselves than, buying a media deal with a publisher. And that, usually things aren't going to go haywire. The publisher's not going to turn around one day and tweet something ridiculous. So it's a little different, but we always look for those signals that align with what we stand for as a company. And together, all the people that are promoting us and part of our community are reflective of what we want to put out there in the world.
Yeah. And I think you're breaking the mold in a good way, right? Like I had a community for On-Ramp and stuff too. So on the community building side, right? As a consumer, you would much rather hear from someone that is, even if I think people kind of trend towards, talking to celebrities and influencers and stuff, but I think that it's a lot more powerful hearing from someone that actually uses the product and it's more organic and it's authentic, because at the end of the day, you just want to know that what you're using is actually, like justifiably so, like something good to use. And you can tell that a little bit more from someone who doesn't have to be doing what they're doing rather than someone who's getting paid with a paycheck. But I guess you guys have probably tried a bunch of different marketing techniques and whatnot. So from that perspective, I'm kind of curious, what's worked the best when it's come to, trying to promote financial literacy, or whether that's what you're doing at Publix or making the stock market social? What's worked best and what's definitely not worked for you guys, or what, even in the industry, not even necessarily to Publix, but from your observation?
Yeah, we've had some good success with some of these like kind of creative marketing campaigns and stunts that are kind of completely out of left field for our category. So we had a pretty viral video last winter with Michael Bolton. He like cut a song for us about payment for order flow, and it was hilarious. And he really brought it. And that got, I think, like 1 billion media impressions in like 3 days or something insane. But we've had a lot of luck in timing cultural sort of creative campaigns in dropping them in a really timely fashion. So after the Bolton thing and the GameStop thing, there was this like sort of like anti-establishment sentiment brewing. And so that's when we created these like blue banker bags that the strap said, "I don't work on Wall Street," which I saw Liquidity posted it. They saw it on the subway last week, or so it's still going around. But we really want to tap into cultural moments where the stock market is like in the news next to XYZ celebrity, sports team, whatever. And those are the moments where we can really get attention for the things we want to promote. I'm trying to think of what doesn't work. I mean, early on, we were trying everything. Like I joined the company, I think there was under 20 people. And so at that time we were doing a lot of, I used to like look up random blogs and email the person and be like, hey, I noticed you wrote about this. Like, can you add us? Like we were just scrappy. We were all over the place. And so I think as you get bigger, you start to look at like what channels and activities are really scalable and which aren't, and you sort of mature as a company. But back in the day, like I was packing boxes of swag, sending them to like Ramp Capital and random people. You didn't know who we were. And I'd be like watching Bridgerton, just like stuffing boxes. So it's been an interesting journey, sort of scaling the team and the processes to the place we're at now. But when you're small, you just got to roll up your sleeves and try anything. Some of it sticks, some of it doesn't.
And wearing a lot of hats while you do it. I mean, that's the coolest part of startups for me, which we could have talked about as well as a guest. But I don't work on Wall Street bags. I will say, thank you for sending me one of those, by the way, but it hit at a perfect time as I left my job at a Wall Street firm. So thank you for that. You motivated me. Public actually motivated the job change, whether you knew it or not. So thank you for that.
We knew it was coming. We wanted to be ready.
Well, honestly, thank you for the support.
The competition in startup merch is strong. Everyone's pushing each other, and none of us are in the merch business, but I see some stuff out there and I'm like, damn, you people are good. And we got to step up our game always. But it is interesting how merch has become so central to like marketing for these companies that have nothing to do with retail. It's pretty wild.
All it comes down to is the simple fact that people love free shit. Sorry, Bobby. But people love free things. They love shirts. It's the easiest marketing you can do. Toss them on your shirt and they'll wear it anywhere. Like I wear random shirts. I have a Public shirt and a hat too. And I've worn it around before and gotten questions. You cannot pay for that. There's like no $ amount that you can put on it. It might not always work, but if you get it on a handful of the right people and they put it in the right channels and it works for you. And that's like the whole community build part, right? Is you're getting your users to do your work for you. And it makes it much easier for you too. So, and who doesn't like free swag? So,
and people feel like they're part of something bigger. I think sometimes like, especially like apps in tech, it can just seem so sterile. Like who loves a fintech app? When we send someone an invest hat, they're like, I love Public. It's like, okay, like you love a bunch of code. Like I'm not downplaying the code. Our engineers are amazing, but that's how you create an emotional connection. And that's a lot in tech marketing. That is like the goal, because you got to look yourself in the mirror and be like, yeah, we're an app. How do we get people to love a financial app? And there's all different ways of doing that. But I think it is like making people feel part of something, like letting them understand what you believe in and show them that you might have like shared values in a way. And something as simple as a hat. I think one of the first brands that I noticed doing this well was Outdoor Voices with their Doing Things hat. It was just so simple, but you see it and you're like, okay, that person is someone who lives an active lifestyle. They're adventurous, just said something about you and is brilliant. So that was kind of the inspiration for our hats.
Yeah. And you just want to find people who are like you. We all want to be like accepted in some sort of group. And then like from a business standpoint, I mean, I can't remember which survey this was, but a ton of investing surveys. It's just like younger generations, especially, want to feel like they're involved in the process with the companies they're investing in. And even if they're not investing in them, they're just using their product. Like I would much rather feel like I have a say than like be reaching out to these companies, asking them questions and just like never getting a response. That drives me crazy. So it's really cool to have, I feel like there's been a huge surge of companies like Publix and like OnRamp that are really trying to engage the people that they're trying to get to use their platform. So it's less transactional and more like relationship based. And especially the merch, for some reason, that really a $20 shirt really does something for an emotional connection. I should try that with men. I'll let you know. Just start bringing them t-shirts. But if it works for businesses, never say never.
Get one of those t-shirt cans and just like go walk out on the street and start aiming.
I'll go downtown and let you know how that goes.
Yeah.
But I guess on that note, we're getting sort of close to time here, but I always like to ask some fun questions. Mostly, what do you do to decompress? And I always hope that one of those answers is to get outside, not an ad, just something you should do. But other than that, like what do you, because you're in New York City. I love New York. I miss it. I need to come visit, but there's so much to do. So what do you do specifically?
I definitely get outside. I'm a big runner. It's kind of stinky air in New York. It's this time of year, it's like hot garbage, vomit air. So it's not like I step outside and have this amazing like moment. It's usually like, ugh. But then it's good. I go out by the river. So I love doing that. I'm a big music fan. I could be completely entertained just like making playlists and listening to them like all day. I don't need TV. I could just listen to music. So when COVID, hopefully we reach a day, like I just can't wait to go back to more shows. But yeah, I like doing a lot of things that have nothing to do with career advancement or my job. I sometimes I really respect,
God forbid.
I respect people though, but sometimes I open Twitter on a Sunday and this person has like a thread on like I don't know, and about work, and I'm like, I really envy that, but like I just, when I have off time, I feel like it's best for me creatively to like expose myself to ideas and things that have nothing to do with my job. And so like a lot of my friends are from like different industries. Like I try to just like diversify the inputs of things coming into my brain as much as I can. So I'm not just kind of living in, the world. I love my job, but like I also like making a good 80s playlist and just jamming out.
As you should. I mean, the 80s music was great. My parents love that I share that love of the 80s music with them. But also I envy that attitude sometimes, but it's also like it's 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, Jerry, go to dinner with your wife. Why are you writing threads about investment strategies and tail risk stuff? It's just interesting. It takes all kinds.
But I don't judge it. Like, I'm like, look, if Jerry's happy doing that, like, hey, interesting. But I'm just like, whoa, I'm not even on that wavelength right now. I'm just, people are built different. I'm very like, people should do what makes them happy. For me though, like getting outside.
Yes.
Spending time with friends, calling a family member. That's how I like to spend my free time personally.
Got to stay sane. No, for sure. I guess who's your favorite artist? I have to ask now since you're making all these playlists. You can pick a few. I know it's hard to pick one. I can't.
My favorite ever is Bruce Springsteen. That was my dad's favorite, so it's like sentimental. But my claim to fame is like 2 jobs ago. There was this guy who was about my dad's age I worked with from New Jersey who worked there. And I mentioned I was a big Springsteen fan. He's like, you're not bigger than me. So this was a startup. So a bunch of people at work coordinated this like Bruce Springsteen trivia contest that was like an hour and a half long, different components, like name the song, name the lyric. I beat this guy. Like I have a sickness. I am like the biggest Bruce Springsteen fan. So he's always number one. I also love John Mayer a lot, which is ironic because my name is Katy Perry.
I was hoping you'd say Katy Perry. Do you have a favorite Katy Perry song, or are you just so burnt out from the fact that people...
Yeah. What's the one where she's on the bike in the wedding dress crying?
That could be any of her music videos. I'm actually not sure.
Oh, Hot and Cold.
Okay. That's a good one. As long as you didn't say Firework, I feel like everyone always goes to that one. So
Firework,
at least you switched.
Teenage Dream, Played Out.
Yep.
I think it's Hot and Cold.
Okay. I'm on board with that pick. Not that you asked my endorsement.
What are your favorite artists?
John Mayer is a really good one. I'm trying to think if I can even pick one now. It depends on the day because I really, we're both from like a super rural upstate New York, like Cowfields. I think my hometown has like 1 stoplight and there's like under 1,000 people. There's nothing. Like the closest mall's an hour. That's how that always traumatizes people when I tell them that. But I also like the 80s, 70s. My parents, I have a playlist that I share with them that we listen to a lot. Anything like Billy Joel, Prince, that sort of thing.
Country? Do you still listen to country after you moved?
I do.
Luckily,
too. My roommates like country. I know it's interesting in Chicago. It's very polarizing in cities. These city folk just think they're too good for country, and it's just very an interesting experience. So
I saw Jason Aldean at Wrigley Field. That was a turnout.
Oh,
no one in New York. I went to a Luke Bryan show in New York and there was like literally 10 people there. I was like, this is epic. And then I told my friend,
criminal.
Huh?
That's criminal.
I know. I mean, it is, you got to take it ironically, right? But like to me, it's like nostalgic because that's like what, I used to listen to. So
that's the good stuff. I would say other than that, I don't know. I really like Lana Del Rey when I'm just feeling sad, which is all the time. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. But I do love Lana Del Rey, which is controversial for a lot of people.
She's good though. She writes good songs.
She does. I mean, John Legend's another classic. I have a very hard time picking though, because I also just have like Megan Thee Stallion on my playlist here. I'm like going through, it's very chaotic, as am I. So if you think my playlist is bad, you should see my
Yeah, you gotta drop your Spotify URL in our DM or something.
So I have Apple Music, and I shouldn't say that online. Yeah, I'm rare. I know. Just built different.
I like that one.
I just have never gotten rid of it, but we could talk about that offline. I will drop some of my favorite hits with you, and we can collab on a new playlist. We'll drop it for the Chicks of FinTwit podcast listeners and Bobby in the background here, who's laughing at us. But Katie, thank you so much for being on. I'm glad that we got the best Katy Perry on the pod. Very exciting. Where can all of our followers find you on social media?
First of all, thanks for having me. As I said at the beginning, I'm just happy to be here. This podcast is badass. So everyone, if you're not subscribed, subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Katie E. Perry. Probably tweeting about Chris Evans or Public. So if you don't like either of those things, you can just mute me. No hard feelings. Also, you can download Public at public.com if you're into that. Also on like LinkedIn and stuff, but that's a little harder to plug. But thank you again. This was so much fun.
Yeah, thank you. No, this was awesome. We'll have to have you back and we can talk about, I don't even know what, everything that we didn't cover because there's too much. We can talk a little bit more about like country music or something. I don't know how many people would listen to that.
Country music artists.
We'll work on that. We'll put that in the backlog. But all right, everyone, thank you for listening. We will be back next week with a new episode. So stay tuned.